Is my head cut off like it always is? I hope not. Hello everybody, my name is Lucy and welcome to Books and Brushes. So today is my November wrap up. November was a strange month for me. I had some very high highs and some very low lows in my personal life, so my reading was a bit off kilter, should we say. But I have some really interesting books to talk about. Let's forget home personal shit because we don't want to discuss, and let's get into what we're really here for, books, because fiction is better than reality. So the first book I read in November was More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera. This was the first book I read for the Join the Six Readathon round 2, part of my TBR. I read this one first, and beginning of the month, my brain was not here. I was in some weird ass place mentally, and I think that really affected me reading this book. I just felt really numb. I can't even explain to you what I mean. I wasn't fully in my head and I wasn't here on this earth. So when I talk about this book, just bear that in mind. My brain wasn't having none of me. I was also pretty sick during this time. It was weird. This was a beautiful present that Matthew got me for our little gift exchange of me for my birthday, and I kind of buddy read this with Connor over at Connor's Library Corner. This one was so ridiculously hyped and I'd heard so many good things, so when I read it and my brain just was not here, I think I ruined it. It's an odd one. Let's get back on track. The vibe summary. This is my new segment where I talk about the vibe of the book if you don't want to know any of the plot and you want to go in blind. So vibe summary for this one: gritty urban life contemporary, mental health and gay struggle, memory, trauma and who you really are. But you can skip if you don't want to know any more. Since this one's so hyped, that's totally valid for you to do that. But if you do want to know the plot, my thoughts on the plot, you can keep listening. So this one is about a boy who has had a traumatic thing happen in his past with his dad, and he's also having some confused mixed feelings. He's got a girlfriend who's really loving and supportive of him, but then there's this whole thing with his friend and it all gets kind of complicated and weird, and there's a facility nearby that could remove your memories and help you forget traumas. So for people that have experienced big trauma, they can remove that for you and help you improve your life by forgetting it. And our main character is toying whether that's a good thing to do or not, and whether it would be better off to forget and to change who he is and to move on from what he's currently dealing with. I'll start off with a few of the negatives I had for this book, because there were a few negatives. I'm not sure whether, it's hard to tell whether it was just me being in this weird place at this time or whether it was just the book, but the writing style was odd. I was quite confused near the beginning. There was a lot of nicknames for all the kids he lives nearby, and by the way, I hated that friendship group. They were dicks. I get that's probably realistic, but I didn't like them at all. I would have ditched those assholes from day one. It was also weird with his girlfriend. It seemed like he loved his girlfriend and his girlfriend was awesome, and then he didn't like her, and then he did, and then he didn't, and I was just confused. There was one point where they were on like this roof for a party and everything seemed fine, and then he was like, you could cut the tension with a knife, and I was like, could you? I didn't pick up on that at all, and it was just a bit weird. The writing style was quite strange to me. I don't know, like I said, it could have just been me. It was odd, and this book obviously had trigger warnings for such things as mental health, gay struggle, suicide, trauma, abusive friends and family, all sorts of stuff going on, and because of the place I was in, it was weird. It didn't trigger me. This book wasn't the reason I was in a weird place. I was pre-weird before, and this book didn't trigger me further. It didn't hurt me emotionally, don't worry about that. But when he was talking about suicide, coward's way out, there was this one line that made me go, and there was a few things that kind of hit weird. I related to the main character for that aspect, or the mental health struggle that he was going through, but also not, because he's very different, but still there was some element of relatability, but also there was a lot of elements of not. I don't know how he got on with his friendship group. I don't know how he did, and I didn't understand his thought process. He made some decisions that I was like, okay, that's a decision. Why? Okay, sure. So I just think this character was very different to me, but also that mental health element I could relate to. What I'm trying to say is this book didn't trigger me, but it was close to home, and because of the weird place I was in, I kind of went a bit numb to it. Maybe that's why I didn't have an emotional reaction to this book. Everyone tells me this is so emotional and a cry fest. I loved the twist of the ending and I enjoyed the sentiment of the story, but something about the writing style and something about me being numb to the emotional aspect, I don't know. I'm trying to explain something that doesn't have a logic to it, and I don't know whether it's the book or my brain or a mixture of both. I might have to reread this, although it's painted, which is annoying. I don't think I was in the right place and I didn't really understand understand half of what I read. I can't remember half of what I read. I remember the ending being quite good, but I definitely wasn't in the cry fest emotional place I expected to be. I think I kind of read it a bit numbly. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry it's not the review people were probably hoping for, but you've got loads of hyped reviews on this book. Everyone loves it. I'm sorry that I was weird. Maybe I'll reread it and be like, oh my god, you're an idiot, you were in a stupid place. It's amazing. But mentally was not here for this book. I think we'll move swiftly on. Next up, again, I was still in this kind of place, but I was phasing out of it. I was quite sick while I read this one. This was one where I fell asleep quite a lot while I was trying to read it, which doesn't happen to me when I read. I'm more of like a mild insomniac. I'll go through phases where I'm kind of normal, although it takes me a good few hours to go to sleep. I envy the people that put their head on the pillow and go. I hate you. I do not. It takes me a good few hours to go to sleep, and I could go through certain months where I just don't sleep for days, although I'm not in that way at the moment, so that's nice. My sleep schedule is not doing too badly right now. But while I was reading this book, I kept falling asleep while I was trying to read it, which is weird because I don't fall asleep. What is that? It takes me 3,000 positions, the certain phase of the moon, and praying to the gods for 3 hours to get me to fall asleep. So I don't know how I was just drifting off. I must have been ill. Next book I read, also the second of my TBR for the Jordan 6 Readathon round 2, and that was Neverworld Awake by Marisha Pessel. So this is a mystery. So let's do the vibe summary, because you might want to go to the mystery with no plot at all. Contemporary mystery with an estranged group of friends, Groundhog Day-esque infinite time loops, mysterious deaths, and people keeping secrets. So you can do the old skip if you don't want to hear, but I have a lot of thoughts on this book. Maybe you do want to hear. Here's a little spoiler for you. I wasn't really a fan. So it's about this girl, and she used to be a part of this friend group, and one of the friend group died in mysterious circumstances, and ever since then she's kind of been estranged from the group. The group drifted apart, mostly her. The rest of the friends still talk. She hasn't talked to them in ages, and her parents are kind of like, don't talk to them, let's just distance from this. But one night there's this party, and she's like, I have to go. I want to have closure. I don't want to just ditch them. So she decides to go to this party, and on the way back to one of the friends' mansions, there is this car crash incident, but they make it home, everything seems fine. Next morning they go about their daily stuff, but this weird man turns up and tells them they are in the Neverworld Awake, and they are going to relive this day over and over again until they decide which one of them needs to die. None of them believe him for this, but they go about their life, and then they live the day again and again and again. And the man was right, they are trapped in the Neverworld Awake, which is an infinite time loop where you live the same day over and over again. Everyone in the outside world just resets, but this group will remember every single time and know that they're in this loop. What happened was, on the way back from that party, that car crash, they all die, or they're all dying in that car crash, and only one of them can survive the car crash. They didn't make it out safely, and they have to vote on which one is going to be the survivor, and the rest are going to die. That's the basic plot, or the beginning. I'm going to go a little bit more into the plot, so again, you can skip if you like. So what ends up happening is they're obviously confused, and they don't believe it, but they're going to have to believe it, and this loop just goes on, and they end up kind of going mad. A lot of them end up just disassociating from the situation and just doing whatever and living the same day over and over again, and they definitely procrastinate the vote. None of them are down for the vote. They're just like, no, this is the situation, we're just in a time loop now, okay. And all of the members of the group go off and do their own separate things, and the loops just go on and on. It's described in a very whimsical, vague way where you can tell that they've been in this loop for who knows how many times. It could be their 100th day, their 500th day. They've done so many that they've forgotten most of the previous ones, or not forgotten, but they've all kind of merged together. There is this one couple that goes off and just terrorizes a local nearby cruise ship, and they start really torturing the people on the ship, and our main character spies on them, and she's like, you shouldn't be doing this, and they're like, well, they'll never remember, it always gets reset anyway, just leave us alone. There are certain members of the group doing very suspicious, strange, mysterious things, and it's all very odd, mysterious, and lethargic. I totally get why that was the vibe, and that was very interesting. I liked the idea of this infinite loop, them going insane. I enjoyed that, but it was slow to read because of that, because obviously it's so infinite and the characters are describing lethargy, and it's a bit slow and it's a bit dull. There's not enough threads for the mystery for you to catch on to early on. The mystery doesn't start till like near the end, where you figure out what happened to the friend a year ago, how he died. It's one of the friends, but who is it? That mystery doesn't really start till quite late on. So in the beginning you're just, what watching these people meander through this time loop. Also, I didn't understand why they were so procrastinating on the vote. I get that they wanted to live and they know that by voting, most of them would end up dying. However, it seemed like they weren't having fun. This time loop was ruining them. They were not enjoying themselves. And they didn't even attempt the vote for years, it sounds like. At the beginning, I would have been like, right, should we sit down and start discussing this among us style, who deserves to live? No, they didn't even attempt that. I thought they would have at least tried, come to an impasse, realizing that they were never going to agree, and then go off and do random stuff. But they didn't even attempt it initially. They're just like, we have to vote. Guess we're stuck here forever then, which was a bit weird. At least give it a try. And you're not going to talk about this. They just didn't talk about the situation they were in at all. They just spread out and did their own separate things immediately, which was weird. The ending was interesting with the mystery and finding out what happened and who done it and how they were all involved and all the secrets, because they were all holding secrets. All things came together. I liked the vibe, interesting concept, but the execution wasn't quite there for me. Talking about it now I finished the book, it sounds better than when I was actually reading it. It makes more sense when I try and summarize it. I get that was the vibe, was trying to show you how laborious and confusing and vague this became for them, but I'm also trying to read and entertain myself. I don't want to be in a lethargic, vague time warp of numbness. I just came out of being numb from a previous book. I wanted a bit of excitement. I wanted something to grip me, and for a mystery, it wasn't really mysterious enough. It was just vague. The mystery didn't start till too late. I liked the idea, but execution was just a bit too slow. But hey, maybe you'll like that. Definitely achieved the vibe I think it was going for, just not for me. Next up, the last book I read for the Join the Six Readathon round 2. Now this one I didn't quite get to in time. I started it during the readathon, but I never finished it by the end date. 2 out of 3, wasn't too shabby. I ended up reading this one for a good week and maybe a bit. I read this one for a long time. This was all over my birthday too as well, so that's probably why it was a bit slower. And that was A Song of Wraith and Ruins by Roseanne A. Brown. I also listened to a lot of other books, but we'll talk about those in a minute. But I listened to a lot of other books during this one because I was juggling more than one book. For now, let's talk about this one because I have so many things to say. The vibe summary. High fantasy in an African-inspired world, black girl magic, interesting mythologies and magical systems, festivals, character-driven, and assassinations of people you know. So the plot of this book. I highly recommend you stay for this part. You can skip, but I want to tell you about the plot. This book is set in an African-inspired fantasy world. It's been a while since I read a high fantasy, which is why it took me a while to get through the beginning. It takes place in the main city of Zaran, which is holding the festival Solstasia. Now, I'm going to pronounce probably everything wrong. This is how I think the word sounds, but I could be wrong. I was pronouncing it Solstasia in my head, and I'm sorry if we're thinking different pronunciations, but I'm gonna have to plump for one. Our main city of Zaran is holding the festival of Solstasia, which is where they have this competition with a bunch of different champions who are fighting for the right to usher in the new era. Think of like Chinese New Year with the animals. They have this whole mythology of different gods, and when you're born, you're aligned, a certain god aligned in a certain faction of your mythology, and these champions represent those, usher in the age of life or the age of the moon. There's also these sorts of different ones. I love the mythology, but we'll talk about that in a bit. During Solstasia, there's a lot of refugees outside the city, including Malik and his 2 sisters. They are coming into the city to escape their poor home life, and there's a lot of racism towards where he comes from, which was, what was it, Ashran? When they're in the city, his youngest sister, Nadia, gets taken by an evil spirit god. Malik manages to make a deal with him. The god wants Malik to kill the princess, and if he manages to, he will get his sister back. So Malik is attempting to kill the princess, and to do so, he manages to wind himself up to being one of the champions in the Solstasia tournament so that he can get close to Karina and kill her. On the flip side, Princess Karina is struggling with a lot of difficulties of her own. She's had a lot of family tragedy in the past. The royal family isn't doing so well. There's a lot of protection magic that the city doesn't know about, which she's trying to upkeep, and it's her job now to rule over the city and run Solstasia. But she also needs to assassinate one of the champions to keep a protection spell alive for her city so she can save them, and she's going to have to kill the champion of Solstasia. So it's looking like she might have to kill Malik. And so these 2 characters are trying to assassinate each other, and they don't know, and for completely different reasons, and it's them working closer and closer to get towards each other, but then also developing some kind of relationship and thinking, can I kill this person that I've gotten to know? Because there's big stakes here, so how can I not, but also am I capable of even doing that? This book was so good. I absolutely loved it. I mean, I'd heard amazing things, but it's another thing to read it for yourself. It was so good. I have not read a high fantasy in a long time. When I first picked up this book, the first couple of chapters were a bit, oh yeah, we're in high fantasy world. I have not read a high fantasy in a long time. It took my brain a while to adjust to all of the politics, geography, names. You know what it's like reading high fantasy. There's a lot to grasp. So it took me a hot minute, but that wasn't really because of the book. It only took me a couple of chapters or so. It was so well explained. It was not very info dumpy considering the amount of information this book manages to convey. All of the information was really interesting about the world, laid out piece by piece, and so it was digestible. The world was fantastic. So the world building. It didn't give you too much about the geography, just the main things you need to know about Zoran and where Malak came from, the racism and tense relationships between different places in the country. So where Malak comes from, they're considered quite dirty, lesser people than the people of Zoran. The Zoranians are quite rude and awful to Eshran people, and Malak's masquerading as not Eshran. So they're all like, oh hello my friend Noble, oh don't you hate the dirty peasants? He's like, Malak's like, so that was really interesting. The magic system was so well developed and interesting. It was a very unusual magic system, not unusual in a way that was hard to explain, but just quite different. Then there was the gods, how they align themselves at birth. Like I said, it's kind of like a mix between the Chinese New Year, where they're trying to usher in a new era, and in horoscopes, when you're born determines what god you are aligned under. Of course, because this world there is magic, that really affects how you live on through life and what gods you worship, and I just thought it was so interesting to read about. I really enjoyed that. The plot was so good. It was interesting throughout. It was never dull. From Karina's perspective, from Malak's perspective, they both have totally different conflicts going on, but working in and around this same environment and with the same characters, getting closer to each other. I love the fact that they're both trying to kill each other, but neither knows that the other's trying to do that. So they both think they are the wolf among the sheep when they're both wolves. Both of these characters had really legitimate reasons for wanting to kill the other. It wasn't just, I'm an assassin. It was life or death. She was trying to protect his city. He was trying to save his sister. It made sense. The plot was interesting. There was twists and turns. It was tense. The relationships between so many of the characters were really good. And the characters, this is a high fantasy. I said it had world building and magic systems and interesting geographies and politics and words and ideas, but it was also kind of character driven. Characters were really interesting and developed, and I really loved that. Our main characters, Malak and Karina, you get to know them so incredibly well, and they have such humanity and emotion and thought the whole time. They're trying to kill each other, and you really feel for both of them, and you want them both to succeed, but obviously they can't because they're trying to kill each other, and you understand where they're coming from and why, and you're rooting for both of them even though they can't both win. The characters are just so humanized and realistic in this fantasy setting. I don't know how this book juggles all those things. Literally, this book juggles everything it could possibly need to have in such a good way. I don't know how it balanced all these things. It's like spinning all the plates over here. An interesting, highly developed world, mythologies and magics, but also it's character driven and filled with so much humanity and grounded. How does it do all of them successfully together? It was superbly written. I cannot praise it enough for that, and it wasn't lacking in any area. It wasn't overdone in any area. It all just felt so natural and effortless, even though I'm betting to write it, it probably wasn't. This would have been such a complex, intricate thing to write so well and to seem so easy, but also be so complex. Genius writing. And another thing I loved about our main characters was they're very realistic, very raw. They felt like real human beings. They're in this fantasy setting, but I can see them as real people, which you need in a fantasy. It can't all be about the world. This one managed to juggle both so well because the characters were so developed. I was so involved with these characters and who they were. It was so interesting, and the plot was gripping because I wanted them to be okay, and it was tense. I also loved these two main characters for another reason, and that was that they both had really human traits in the fact that they have two ailments, which I've never seen in books before, or you rarely see in books. So let's start with Malak. Definitely say that Malak has anxiety. A lot in the book, he has panic attacks, and he's constantly down on himself and worrying he's ruined everything and he's a failure and he can never do the things he needs to do. He's in charge of saving his sister and he has to do the impossible to do it, and he's terrified that he won't be able to and he'll fail. With his anxiety, that it's a struggle. He's having to battle the wraiths. It is like a mental disorder for him, but it's also because of magic. This manages to involve a mental health thing with magic and make it one. It shouldn't make sense, but it totally does, and it was so well done. I got it. The panic attacks that Malik went through were super relatable and grounded, well written, really realistic, but also magic. I'm not explaining this well. So essentially he has like demons in his brain that he sees everywhere, and they're called the wraiths. They are in his brain, but they're also real, and it's a manifestation of magic. Malik has magic and he has to learn to control it, but before he can, it's hindering him, and they're like demons. Such an amazing concept and so well written, developed. I feel like the panic attacks that Malik had just seemed super realistic, and they were a hindrance that he couldn't control and something he had to overcome, something he could overcome to achieve his end goal. And I just really like that. It feels grounded and realistic. It's something that's nice to see in a book, a main character being a hero despite having panic attacks. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but also it's super embarrassing and a hindrance when you've got life or death situations going on, but he could overcome them, and the whole magic intertwined with the mental health. It was super interesting and a very cool way of showing it. So it's fantastical but also realistic at the same time. And then there's Karina. So Princess Karina struggles with constant migraine. So that's the problem that people in the real world have, people who have frequent migraines. Nice to see a character have this. I can't tell you one single character in any other book I've ever read that has suffered from migraines. Can you? Can you name a character in any book ever that has migraines? Because I can't think of any. Even side characters. And I know people in real life who suffer from migraines. I bet we probably all know at least one person who suffers. So it's cool to have a character, especially a main character, suffer from something so normal in the real world. Something that is just a real thing. Again, it hindered her. It wasn't a main factor of the story or anything, but it was just an affliction she had. It was part of her character, part of who she is, part of her many attributes. And I like that the two main characters of this story both had these ailments or afflictions that were real in this fantasy world. It brought everything together and it was really fun to see. Amazing world building, fantasy, plot that was intense and interesting, character driven. This book really had everything. A magic system and mythology that was so interesting. I really loved the mythology with the gods and the aligned and the magic and how it all came together, the festival. What else could this book have given me, really? The interesting culture of it, which is so African, bringing elements in from all over. The food, the language, just everything. This book is so good, the hype is so real, and it's nice to have that black girl magic. I absolutely love this book. It was so fantastic, so easy to get into and read. And for a high fantasy, I can't gush about it anymore, really, can I? So next up, recently I joined a fairly local library. I have wanted to join a library for so long, and I haven't. It's been something I've always been meaning to do, and during this pandemic and everything, I thought it'd be a really fun idea to get one of those library apps where you can get audiobooks, ebooks, and have the app. So I signed up to gov.co.uk, which is Britain's is government, the official. So I searched for Hampshire libraries, and the most official library nearby was off island, but it's fairly close, it's not too far. Although there are definitely libraries closer, but this must be like the official government libraries. And I signed up because I thought I'm never going to go to it in person anyway. I've got the BorrowBox library app, and I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, which is great because I absolutely love listening to audiobooks, and it's so nice to have free books since I'm the broke bitch. I can't do nothing about it. It's been really fun. I get to go through books that I may not have ever have seen before, and it's just been a really fun time. So the first book I listened to on this app was All the Things We Never Said by Yasmin Rahman. Now you might recognise this book because I've read it before. This is a book I read last August, and it was one of my favourite books of 2019. I loved this book, and it's been over a year since I've read it. I've forgotten how much I loved this book. I'm re-listening to it, brought it all home. This book is quite a visual story, as in the formatting of this book, as I told you before, is very unusual and interesting. So I was very curious to see how they were going to translate such a visual book into an audio format. Oh, it's good. Re-listening to this book was everything. I love this book so much. I relate so heavily to the themes and the characters. All three of the characters are so realistic, and they feel like my friends. The situation is so realistic and true. The emotions, it hits me every time. I cried. And unlike the book where I had to stop through my tears, this was an audiobook. So it just kept coming in, even though I was crying my eyes out, couldn't see anymore. Still listening. So good to listen to. I do want to sit down and do a full review for this book because I want to talk about it, but then this wrap up will be like 3 hours long. Do we want that? No, we don't. Vibe summary. Hard-hitting, emotional, mental health contemporary. Suicide pacts, friendship, talking about how we feel. Disability rep, LGBT rep, emotional, realistic story. I love this book. This book is about 3 girls who are, for 3 very different reasons, in a bad enough place where they want to commit suicide, and they sign up to this online forum that will match you with people in your area who also want to commit suicide, so that you can create a suicide pact together. And these 3 girls come together who are so wildly different from each other, and they start off a bit on the rocks because they're so different and their guard is up, but when they become friends and discover that talking about how you feel is valid and that other people can understand you and other people out there do understand you, and just sticking up for other people and building really strong bonds. But also there are forces against them, let alone their own brains. So we've got a main character who's in a wheelchair, who's a paraplegic. She's also lesbian, which she has no love interest. Let me repeat that. None of the characters in this book have any romance or love interests whatsoever. I know, a YA book without love interest? Amazing. It's all about friendship. It's all about mental health, what goes on inside of us. It's all about family, friends, and there's no love interests whatsoever. Yeah, we have a lesbian. She just is. I like that we don't have to always go into everyone's love story. And there's talks about invisible illnesses. A lot of talks about, obviously, depression and anxiety. There's a lot of trigger warnings if that wasn't clear. So suicide, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, anxiety, accidents, death, all sorts. This book is a book that needs to be in the world. Also, we got main character Maureen, who's got a whole Muslim community thing going on. I think her parents are from Bangladesh. I could be wrong. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. But there's definitely a cultural element there, which is really cool to see. This book's set in Britain and the characters are just so good. They feel like real people. Cara is so funny. She's got such a personality and I understand her dark humour. I relate so heavily to her main character Maureen. The voices, I understand her so badly. Olivia, she's got such an interesting brain and such a horrific story too, and just the way the 3 interact. I've stopped making sense a long time ago. I planned this, how I was going to review this in my head last night, and then realised I can't possibly. This is a book that needs to be in the world and I love it. And like I said, I was unsure how it was going to turn the visual formatting of this book. I need to show you. So we've got the normal text for Maureen, and then this is the chaos, she calls it, which is basically her depression, and we can see it talking to her in this scary, ominous font. That gets more and more intense as the book goes on. Then we have Olivia's section, which is almost like poetry. It's very visual. Words represent exactly what they mean. So small words are tiny, spraying across the page. The letters are all... It's hard to explain unless you read it, but visually it looks like it reads. So I was wondering how they were going to convey that. The audiobook was stunning. I couldn't believe it. They managed to convey this so well in audiobook. The production quality, the acting, just top notch. I was blown away by the quality of the audiobook. So if you haven't got the physical book and you have access to a library app like I do, the audiobook is totally a valid way to go. For Maureen, for the voices in her head, instead of that scary ominous format, they've used it in the production. It's the same actress saying the words. She puts on this darker, meaner voice, and it's got like a slight echo. So they've definitely changed the voice in post and added this echo quality, and it's such a good production. The quality. There's 3 actresses for this audiobook as the 3 girls, because it's narrated by the 3 girls' POV in the book, and all 3 actresses were absolutely perfect. They read it exactly how I read it in my mind, and oh my god, the acting was superb. Maureen sounded just amazing, and the way she managed to go between Maureen and the Chaos's voice. Cara, she delivered those lines. Cara's so intense and she's funny, and that was all delivered top-notch, perfect. Also Olivia's sections was the bit I was worried about most, because that visual representation of how the words are said. I knew that it was reading it just like I read it when I read it physically. If you're just listening to the audiobook and you've never read it, you'll think that Olivia just sounds slightly strange. I knew exactly how it translated into the auditory words so well. She had a normal voice when she was talking to people, but when we were in her POV, she talked kind of disjointed, even without the 3 distinct voices. I've said before, the 3 girls have such differing personalities that it's so easy to distinguish between the 3. Absolutely stunning. The 3 actresses for this audiobook, I just want to praise them because they did an amazing job, and the production quality of the book, superb. I highly recommend this book in the written or the audiobook format. I love this book, and I've talked about this book loads of times before in the past, and I'll always talk about this book because I love it, and I'm so glad I reread it. I just enjoyed it so much. As masochistic as that is, it was so enjoyable to read. I just love this story. Even the bits where I cried so heavily and where I was so emotional over it. This book just grabs me in the heart, and I don't know if it's just because I relate to it personally or it's just a good story. I reckon it's both. Amazing. I will probably re-listen to that audiobook at some point because it's just a great listen and I love it.